Hello and welcome back to today's Credit Versio's Q&A live Wednesday for July 14th. I'm your host, David Michalek. I'm a credit expert with nearly 9 years experience. And during that time, I've conducted over 10,000 one-on-one credit consultations. And I'm looking forward to helping you understand and improve your credit on our live weekly Q&A calls. We do this every Wednesday on both our Facebook and YouTube channels. Please take a second, introduce yourself, let me know where you're from, and then we'll get things started. First thing is, as you might know, our credit reports play an enormous role in so many areas of our life. When our insurance companies, landlord, utility providers, banks, and even our employers are looking at our credit report to see how we honor our obligations, you can see why our credit report is so important. So today, credit reports have become adult report cards. And that's why we do these weekly Q&A sessions. And that's why I've got with me today America's #1 credit expert. Formerly with FICO and Equifax, I'm going to bring on John Ulzheimer. And first, we're going to do an intro video for John, and then we're going to get at it.
John Ulzheimer is America's most recognized credit expert. With 30 years of experience in the credit industry, having worked for both FICO and Equifax, he's the go-to authority for answers to credit questions. Here to answer your credit questions, Credit Versio presents John Ulzheimer.
John, welcome back.
Hey, thank you for having me, David. Good to see you.
It's always good to have you. You know, one of the questions I get during the week on my instant messenger, I don't know if people know that I man that instant messenger, but it's like, is John going to be on this week? I don't know if that means that I'm not quite as entertaining, but I think that people get a lot of great information from you, so they definitely want to know that you're coming.
So I have a funny story to tell you. I do a radio show at a radio station in New Orleans once a month, and I'm a guest, and I go from like 10:10 a.m. Eastern time to 11:10 a.m. Eastern time, which I think New Orleans is an hour behind me.
Okay.
And the guy who hosts the show, he says this is the fastest hour in radio because the minute you get on, our phone banks light up with questions. People start texting. He's like, we never get this number of questions from people about politics, the New Orleans Saints, LSU baseball or LSU football, which is like the stuff that's super popular in Louisiana. But when I get on, man, it is just boom, 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 text message and phone calls just and the hour goes by like that.
Yeah, well, it's like we talked about before, and we bring this up, gosh, probably every time we're on the live together, that this is a subject matter where people just, the vast majority have no idea what's going on. They don't understand how credit works. They don't understand why there's so many scores. And, you know, even though we cover a lot of material every time we do one of these lives, it seems like there's a core section of questions that are pretty much the same that we get week in and week out. So, hot topic to talk about today. And by the way, for those of you who are watching, this is a Q&A live, so you don't have to stick on our topic. If you've got something that's on your mind about your credit, your scores, or anything that has to do with credit, just drop it in the comments. We'll bring it up on the screen, and John and I will do our best to answer it for you. But John, talking about the next big thing, you mentioned this on your Facebook page, and I talked to my team about it a little bit, and that is the FICO 10. Let's bring it up. So bank card and auto industry versions of FICO Score 10 now available. Let's talk about FICO 10.
Sure. So around the middle of last year, maybe like July-ish of last year, FICO announced the soon to be implemented and commercially available FICO 10 suite of scores. And what FICO 10 is it's just the natural organic redevelopment of the FICO score, which has happened numerous times since it was initially built and installed at Equifax in 1989. So a good way, I think, for people who are not in, kind of knee deep in credit scoring like we are, is to think about how often you get a new one of these, right? And so every few months or every couple of years, you get a new one of those, the iPhone this, the iPhone that, with the new operating system, blah, blah, blah. So think of it kind of like that, where The pre-existing version still works perfectly fine, but there's another version available that's a little bit better, and it has some new features that the older ones don't have. And so now you, as a user, have a choice. Do I want to continue to use the phone that I'm using now, or do I want to buy or upgrade my system, my system as in me, to use the newer version and enjoy some of these newer aspects of the phone? So that's kind of how it is with FICO scores and with Vantage scores. Vantage scores, there was 1, 2, 3, and 4. So now they're on Vantage score 4.0. So those are all redevelopments of that scoring system. The thing that's unique about FICO 10 is not that it's a new FICO score, but that it's essentially a suite now, meaning that you have FICO 10, and then you also now have FICO 10T, and that's the letter T. FICO 10 and FICO 10T. And the difference between the two is that FICO 10T considers trended data. So that's all that 24-month historical payment-related information and balance-related information that you see when you pull your credit report now, and you can see all that historical information on your credit cards. Historically, that has not been considered in credit scoring systems until Vantage Score 4, and now in FICO 10T. And so that particular version of the model, it's called the base version. FICO hates that because people call it the generic version or the base version, but it's really kind of like the no frills version of the score. So you had FICO 10 and FICO 10T have become commercially available at Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion in December of 2020. And so that's one model, FICO 10, another model, FICO 10T, at 3 credit bureaus, and 2 times 3 is 6. And so that was 6 new scores that became available in December of 2020. That thing that you just popped up on your screen is the announcement of the normal variants to the FICO score, which are referred to as industry options or industry adjusted scores. Essentially, they're semi-customized versions of the score for specific types of lending. And I don't know if you want to throw that back up there, but the two that are still commonly used today are the auto variant of the FICO score and the bank card or credit card variant of the FICO score. So when you go apply for an auto loan, 9 times out of 10, the decision is going to be made using the FICO auto score. And if you apply for a credit card, 9 times out of 10, the decision is going to be made using the FICO bank card score. And so that's...
Yes, I was going to say, so common are those industry specific scores is that if I go onto my Experian app, that I'm going to see those. When you look under your scores, you'll get mortgage, bank card, or auto, and bank card.
That's right. And there was a time where there was an installment version and a personal finance version and a mortgage version. And those were not very commonly used. And so FICO does not include those variants any longer with their newer redevelopments. So now what you have is FICO 10, FICO 10T, and then FICO bank card, FICO 10 bank card, and FICO 10 auto times 3 credit bureaus. And so, so now you have a new layer of FICO scores that gets laid on top of the pile of other FICO scores that are commercially available. And now lenders get to decide, hey, which do I want to, move to the new version of the iPhone, or do I want to continue to use the pre-existing version of the iPhone? And it's complicated, right? It's complicated. It's not, it's not like you go out and buy a new toaster and then just replace your old toaster and you start making toast. It's not that simple. Whenever you upgrade,
I was just going to ask you, like, what the next part of this is. Let's talk about adoption. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, if you could spend a second just talking about the importance of trended data, because you and I talk a lot about paying credit card debt off in full, paying it before the end of the statement date. Can you talk about some of the benefits that people who do that are going to see with the trended data under the FICO 10T?
Yeah. So the trended data has been on your credit reports for a really long time. That particular data isn't new on credit reports. It's been there for a while. And the value that trended data brings is that essentially, some people call it time series data. It's really the same thing. It's kind of the chronology of the balance, the credit limit, the minimum payment requirement, and the actual payment that was made on an account for the past 24 months. And so it's not very hard to see if someone pays their bill in full every month and then just runs up a new balance and then pays it in full and then runs up a new balance. Or if they have a balance, they make a small payment and carry a large amount and then make a small payment and carry. In the before trended data, when you looked at a credit report, you could not tell the difference between those two scenarios where versus someone was a transactor versus someone was a revolver. You had no idea because you didn't see what their balance was last month or the month before and what their payment was. Now with trended data, it's very, very clear, and you can delineate between someone who is a revolver or a transactor or someone who kind of bounces back and forth between the two. And this information is very predictive, which is, and that's why it has made its way into credit scoring systems, because it does have a correlation with risk, which is why anything makes it into a credit scoring system.
So we went to, like, if we log into like my Discover app, if I go into my Experian app, I'm going to see FICO Model 8, ubiquitous score. Same thing with bank card and also auto. What happened to FICO 9? It seems like we just, like, it was the redheaded stepchild, and it made a quick appearance and it just disappeared. I don't know where I've even seen FICO 9 before.
Yeah, it's certainly out there. If you look at the critical mass of users, it seems to be between FICO 8 and FICO 9. I think, again, because the lender really has the sole option as to which model they want to use. If they test a newer version of the score and it doesn't really offer any, it's called lift. If it doesn't really offer any sort of lift in performance, like if you think of a 0 to 60 time for a car, if I paid $100,000 for a car and it goes from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, and here's a newer version of the same car that's $100,000 and it goes 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds, am I going to drop another $100,000 to get a tenth of a second? Maybe, but maybe not, because the car that I'm using is not broken. And so that's what you run into with scoring systems, that there's not enough lift over the prior version. And there's a whole lot of statistical measurements that you can use, trade-off curves and such, to measure that lift. Then you're not going to get this massive rush for adoption. 10T is a different animal, though, because 10T has the trended data aspect to it, and that's a pretty big deal. It's almost like buying, again, I always go back to cars because I understand cars. It's almost like buying a turbocharged version of a car versus a non-turbocharged version, where the performance is really material. And for a lender, if you can reduce losses by even 0.5%, that's really big for a bottom line, and it's worth implementing. The challenge with implementation is very different for, say, for example, a credit union or a small regional bank versus someone like a Wells Fargo type of bank or a Citibank or a Chase, where they have tens of millions of dollars of custom developed scoring systems that would have to essentially be rebuilt to implement a new score. And that's why you see a delay in implementation, because it's so hard and expensive to upgrade to a new version. And so it's got to be worth it for a catalyst to cause them to take the time and expense to upgrade.
Well, and that's the private sector too. I mean, look at where we are right now with a mortgage FICO. I mean, what is that, 20 years old now?
So the version of score that's used in mortgage lending is FICO 2 at one bureau, I think FICO 4 at one bureau, and FICO 5 at another bureau. And what I'm about to say is not a criticism of FICO, and it should not be considered as such, and it should not be misinterpreted as such. This is a criticism of FHFA, and I'll be very clear about that. In the mortgage world, unlike any other lending environment, the lenders really don't get the decision to make with respect to what kind of score they use. They are beholden to the FHFA, which kind of oversees Fannie, Freddie, USDA, and VA, FHA and VA. And so they have to use the models that FHFA mandates. And FHFA has mandated these really, really old scores that are, like 2 decades old at this point. And that's why they've kind of been left in the dust relative to other types of lending environments where there is no restriction on what type of credit score you can use. And it's also the reason why you see 3 credit reports pulled per applicant per mortgage, where there is no other environment where they do that. Credit card doesn't do it. Auto loan doesn't do it. It's only mortgage where you see, one applicant, 3 credit reports, another applicant, 3 credit reports. That's why you see 6 credit reports many times when you have a co-applicant type of a mortgage scenario.
Interesting. Well, and in that areas like this is where trended data would really come into play. Like you said, being able to determine if somebody is a transactor, and essentially what that means for you watching is that this is somebody who pays off their credit card bill every single month. Now that speaks volumes, especially if you're that person that charges $3,000, $4,000, $10,000 a month. Maybe that's your expense, maybe it's a business, but when you transact, you pay that off. That's something that's easy to see. That tells a lot about your financial wherewithal and how you're handling your credit, rather than getting caught in a snapshot in time. And now you got this, credit limit and a high balance, and then all the other scoring models are going to possibly drop your score significantly because it thinks that it doesn't know that you're a transactor.
That's right. And the only way around that is, well, there's two ways around it. Number one, you can pay off your credit card and then not use it for a month, which is stupid.
Yeah.
Or you can do like that Facebook post that I put a couple of days ago, where I posted my score, where I went in and actually paid all my credit card debt off. A $225 charge slid through that I didn't notice at the very last, but still, my bill on my entire credit report, the only credit card debt that I had was a $225 debt on American Express card. Other than that, I had zero credit card debt because I paid them in full prior to the statement closing date. And then they were all updated to show zero balances, except for that one mistake that I made, which actually may have taken me to 1% utilization, which may have rocketed me up to where I ended up. So that's the only other way around that whole issue, versus trended data, where you don't have to do silly things like that. If you pay in full every month, the score is going to see that you pay in full every month. You don't have to time it like that, that kind of ethical credit score hack that I like to do from time to time.
Yeah, and we'll see how long it takes for whoever's going to adopt FICO 10T to put this into place, because I think that's going to be a game changer. I mean, it'll certainly, for a good chunk of people, for transactors anyway, it's gonna be a little bit of a boost in the score. Okay, we got our question here. So we got people commenting back and forth with each other. That's great. I thought I saw one up. Okay, Tracy, need to raise my credit score and late payments. Yep, great, Tracy. I understand. If you have something more specific about credit reports or scores, feel free to ask. Latoya, so my question is about bankruptcy. In the event it is removed, will all the credit lines that read included in Chapter 7 bankruptcy also be deleted, or do you have to request each separately? Okay.
Yeah, so assuming, Latoya, that you're referring to the actual public record, the bankruptcy public record.
Put that back on for a second.
Yeah. There we go. And I can also see it, David, in the comments section.
Yeah. I'm just leaving up a little longer for people who maybe didn't get the chance to read the whole thing.
Okay. Yeah. So Latoya, the answer to your question is no. If for some reason the public record bankruptcy, the actual filing itself, is removed, well, I'm going to say no, but then let me finish. It's a longer answer than just yes or no. So the answer is no, meaning that just because the public record is removed doesn't mean that all of the debts that are discharged in the Chapter 7 are also going to be kind of washed up in the deletion and also get removed. However, if the Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing is removed because it has hit its 10-year limit for credit reporting, then by that time, all of the debts that were discharged in your Chapter 7 bankruptcy should also be gone, because they can only stay for 7 years. They can't stay as long as the filing itself. So in a normal kind of chronology for a consumer who has a Chapter 7 bankruptcy is they have the debts that are in default or negative. They file the bankruptcy. The bankruptcy hits the credit report in the public record section. All the debts that are discharged in the bankruptcy are updated to show as being discharged. And then as time goes on, the debts are going to age off because they can't be on there for longer than 7 years, but the bankruptcy can. So there should be a 3-year period of time where the only thing negative on the credit report having to do with the bankruptcy is, in fact, the bankruptcy. I guess the answer is it depends on why it was removed. If it was removed because of that it ran its time limit, then all the other stuff should be gone already.
Yeah. Also, Latoya, a question for you, and thanks for that question. How long ago did you file bankruptcy, and have you been rebuilding your credit since then? Okay, Tracy with a question. Tracy, I think you were on with us last time, maybe. I recognize you. Is it good to have someone help you with your debt, like debt relief programs? Okay, so now we're getting into a little bit of the financial side of this. What are your thoughts on that, John?
Yeah, so it depends on what you mean, Tracy, by debt relief. So there are debt settlement companies that are sometimes referred to as debt relief. There are consolidation. You can take out a consolidation loans, and some people call that debt relief. And then there's DMPs, debt management programs, which are usually offered by nonprofit, the Consumer Credit Counseling, the CCCS, the Consumer Credit Counseling Service folks, and those are commonly referred to as debt relief programs as well. So from a financial perspective, a settlement is basically, and so Freedom Debt Relief is that, I don't know if that's a debt settlement company or if that's one of these nonprofit financial counselors.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
Yeah. So if it's a settlement, obviously you're essentially making an offer that's X% of what you actually owe, and I guess this debt settlement company is representing you. And then so if you're able to get out of debt for less than you actually owe, I guess from a financial perspective, that's better. From a scoring perspective, a negative item, it's still negative, meaning that once it's been settled, and that's still considered negative. But to the extent that there is no more balance, obviously that's better because now you're not going to have the lender chasing you down for payment. If it's one of those nonprofit financial counselors, then the DMP or the debt management program does require you to make payments into the DMP that are then distributed to your credit card issuers. And then after, I want to say between 3 and 5 years is the period of time it takes to fully pay out a DMP. Then when you're done with the DMP, then you should be completely debt free. And what the lenders agree to do through a DMP is they won't report you delinquent every single month, which is fantastic because it kind of helps to protect your credit reports and credit scores, where debt settlement does not.
Yeah, and she was following up with a question on that. Will that help with scores or with scores?
Well, the only reason it would help with the score is that the balance is now zero. So that's the only way it would help. So, a charge off with a balance versus a settlement with no balance, they're both still considered equal derogatory events. Really, the only difference between the two is one has a balance and then one doesn't have a balance. And so clearly, you'd like to have no balances versus having balances, if for no other reason as it kind of ends your, the issues or the connection that you have with that particular lender. But I wouldn't expect your scores to fly through the roof because you still have the derogatory entries.
Okay.
You are welcome.
Question from Latoya again. It's been, she's answering my question that I asked her. It's been a year and a half, and yes, I've been rebuilding. My score's in the 680s. Okay, there you go. All three bureaus. I do, however, notice that those trade lines don't show on Credit Karma. That's interesting. Maybe because it's on Experian. Credit Karma doesn't have Experian.
Yeah, Latoya, just to be safe, and I know y'all love Credit Karma, that they're not a repository. If I were you, if you want to get an unvarnished look at what's actually in your credit reports, I would go to annual credit report and pull all three of your credit reports. You can do it for free every week if you really want to do it that often. Then you'll be able to see, without any sort of interference from these companies that kind of buy and resell credit reports or buy and give away credit reports and put all their marketing in on top of it. Then you'll be able to see what your Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion reports look like without any interference, and you can see what exactly is on them and what exactly is not on them.
Excellent. Byron, question from YouTube. How successful are the dispute letters? It's really not up to the dispute letters, Byron. Whether or not something is removed from a credit report is predicated on whether or not it's reporting accurately. And if you want to challenge something and the creditor is either unable to respond or the information can't be verified or there's various other reasons, then accounts get deleted. But there are no such thing as magical dispute letters.
Yeah, let me dispel a myth
Please.
There is no such thing as no dispute letter is better than another dispute letter.
Very true.
That's bullshit, and you can tell them I said it. There is no such thing as a magical 609 dispute letter. That's all marketing mumbo jumbo that is being sold to y'all. I can tell. I've managed this process at a bureau, so I know exactly how dispute letters are treated. The only thing that people look for when they're looking at dispute letters is they're trying to find out what is being disputed, meaning what individual item is being disputed, and what about it is being disputed. So is it a credit card that was never late? Is it a collection that's not mine? That's the only thing they're looking for. They're not reading your letter. Oh my God, it's a 609 dispute letter. I better do something different with it. That doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So
hit that red button and run.
Yeah, there is no red button. It doesn't exist. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get through your letter and the 10,000 other letters that are right behind it and essentially enter them into the system, create dispute forms, send those dispute forms to the furnisher and let them perform their investigation. And then they respond. And then whatever the response happens to be, the credit bureaus are going to, act accordingly. But they're look, trust. Don't get me wrong. I love entrepreneurs and smart people trying to sell things, but there is no dispute letter that's any more effective. I've heard, you should put, you should write left-handed, or you should misspell certain words, or you should refer to the law. That doesn't. That's great. Go for it. If you want to spend money on that kind of stuff, then more power to you. We're all Americans. We all have the freedom to use our money how we want. But I'm laughing about this because I see so many people selling these things and trying to profess that they're like the gospel magicals. If they were the silver bullet, then nobody would have anything derogatory on their credit reports because everybody would be sending the magic dispute letters to the credit bureaus.
Well, and also too, and this is something that, John, we have very, very different roles in this industry. Apart from both being educators, but being in the credit repair space for years and years and years, that's one of the things that we learned early on. It's like, shoot, it doesn't really matter what anybody says. It's just exactly what you said. What's the dispute about? What's the account? Make it as simple as possible and just leave it at that.
That's it.
Really, to go back, Byron, just to put a little bit more on it. Really, so what's the secret sauce with Credit Versio then? It just keeps you organized. It finds mistakes. It'll organize everything for you and keep you on track and help you to do follow-up. And by the way, that is nothing, a credit repair company does nothing more than that if they do that. So this is just to help you be more effective doing your own disputes and your own repair. Okay, and another question from YouTube here. We're getting into little dicey area here. How do you feel about talking about this one? Okay, let me just read it out real quick. Is it true that freezing your secondary credit account like LexisNexis increases the probability that dispute letters will be approved? Okay, there's a little bit to that, but there's another thing that we hear quite a bit.
Yeah, so I've heard that strategy also, that if you freeze your reports, and LexisNexis is a consumer reporting agency. They're not a credit reporting agency, but they're a consumer reporting agency. Have you ever seen your LexisNexis report? Mine's almost 400 pages long. It is unbelievable. The amount of information, duplicative information, but information nonetheless. I mean, literally, I was like, this 400-page PDF can't be valid. This can't be right. And boom, I went through every single page. I'm like, man, I cannot believe how much information they have about me. So they're in fact a consumer reporting agency, although no one would refer to them as a credit reporting agency because that's not the kind of stuff that they maintain. And because they're a consumer reporting agency, they're subject to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And because they're subject to the Fair Credit Reporting Act, you can place a security freeze on that report. You can place a security freeze on any consumer report that some company is maintaining about you. The security freeze is intended to keep is to protect you from fraud, meaning it's meant to prevent parties from accessing the information in response to some sort of an application for credit. And LexisNexis is commonly used for credit applications as well as a verification tool to verify things like addresses and contact information. So it's not just the Equifaxes and TransUnions and Experians of the world. Innovis Data Solutions is also accessed from time to time to verify some identification information. They're a consumer reporting agency as well. And you can freeze all those. What a security freeze does not do is it does not prevent one party from using another bureau's, and they're in the process of investigation. And so there's no systemic reason why freezing your credit reports at any of the consumer reporting agencies would prevent any furnisher of information or other credit reporting agency for performing an investigation. And LexisNexis, I think it's pretty commonly known that LexisNexis is the credit bureau's public records vendor. And so they use, back in the day when liens and judgments were on credit reports, which they're not on your traditional credit reports any longer, and bankruptcies, the bureaus would use LexisNexis for that information and to verify that information. So I think the hypothesis is if you freeze your LexisNexis report, that somehow prevents them from verifying whether or not you have a public record. It's an entirely different thing. They're not using your LexisNexis report to verify that you have a bankruptcy. LexisNexis is going to the courthouse to verify that you have a bankruptcy because they're the public records vendor that's used by the bureaus. And so it's an entirely different section of the company, and credit freezes don't really have any influence over their ability to verify public records.
Yeah, so 86 Miss Mason, this falls into the category of myth that I deal with all day long. John, you've heard it all, having worked in dispute resolution and Equifax. And also, too, while we're at it, and if you're still watching Miss Mason, another one we want to dispel that is kind of in the same camp is the question that you just asked is, if I delete old addresses off my credit report, is that going to help get things deleted as well? And that's a fun one to talk about. And John, I think you captioned the answer to that best by saying that the reason why that doesn't work is this all falls under the category of bureaus are not stupid.
Yeah, that's right. So, if that were the case, then again, no one would have any derogatory information on their credit reports because they would just get all their old addresses. They would just ask for all their old addresses to be removed. And so I think there's this presumption that the old address is somehow the anchor or could be an anchor for derogatory information on a credit report. Remember, the derogatory information comes from a furnisher. It's not generated by the bureau, meaning it didn't come from the bureau. It came from a furnisher. And so the furnisher knows what your address was. The credit bureaus know what your address is. And so there is already an association between the information. But look, I've read that in books, and I've seen that in articles and strategies like the whole freezing your LexisNexis report. I've seen a lot of, I need to write a book about, alternative credit repair tactics and strategies that may or may not actually work. I've even heard, I don't know if you've heard this one, David, is if you opt out, meaning if you opt out your credit report from pre-screening, meaning that the credit bureaus can't sell your name for the pre-approved list. Yeah, so if you opt out, that your credit score will go up. There's YouTube videos that have millions of views about guys screaming in front of their Ferraris about how they were able to help people increase their credit scores because they showed them how to opt out, which, by the way, is free. It can be done in about 8 minutes if you spend the time. So if you opt out, you're certainly going to reduce the amount of mail you get, but it's not, if your credit score goes up, it was because of something else, not because you opted out.
It's funny because, I see all that stuff too, just because YouTube is pretty smart at figuring out, what our YouTube channel is about, because it's all credit related. I think 90% of the stuff on there is the two of us talking. And all I get are credit ads. And yeah, exactly. I see the guy in front of the supercar talking about how he did this and that. It's like, these guys will get 20, 30,000, 100,000 views, and real information like this is going to get, maybe a couple thousand views over time. It's funny how, it's sensationalism. People see that and they want to believe that's true. And I think when they try that stuff and it doesn't work, I don't think they really look at that it didn't work or not. They're like, well, it just didn't work for me, but it's working for somebody because clearly, it's out there, so it must be true. Okay, let's see. I think we got several accounts that are just delinquent. Ms. Mason, I see that you submitted another question, but for whatever reason, I'm not able to bring it over. Try posting it again if you could, unless you deleted it. Okay. Okay, question from Yenny, and then we're going to pivot a little bit, John, and I'm going to find out if I'm the first one to ask you a question about Wells Fargo. Okay. Yenny, after how many rounds of no deletions should we give up? 3 or 4? If you have First of all, the best dispute reason is the one that describes why the account is not reporting correctly. You've heard me say this in the tutorials. It's all over the site. If you want to shoot your shot, let Credit Versio take a stab at it. Great. If you're going round 3, round 4, and nothing's happening, that means the data furnisher is told the bureau that everything's reporting accurately. They've performed under the law, and then from there you go to your next steps. If you have debt that you need to settle it. If you can get a deletion from a collection company, great. If not, then a zero balance is certainly better than a balance on a collection, or you just wait for it to age off. I mean, there's some other options, and we go into this in one of the tutorial videos. Let's see.
By the way, if I could, do you mind if I add to that?
No, please.
So Yenny, this is to kind of add to David's answer. So if you have information on your credit report that is patently wrong, right? Not like, hey, I don't want it there because it's bad, but I know it's right. If you have stuff on your report that is flat out wrong, and you've submitted letter after letter to the credit bureaus, and you've clearly identified the item and have clearly identified why you think it's wrong, meaning that no reasonable person could read your letter and not understand what you're asking, and you're still not getting any sort of remedy, then you should speak to an FCRA plaintiff's attorney, because we're about to have the 12th consecutive year of record FCRA filings in this country, all right? Which means that 12 years ago, the trend of FCRA lawsuits started going like this, and it continued to go like this. And even last year in a global pandemic, we set yet another record of FCRA lawsuits. And this is coming from someone who does most of his expert witness work on the defense side. So if you're really having that much difficulty getting something that's incorrect removed or otherwise corrected, then you should explore your legal options rather than just send another letter or just live with it, because you may be able to force the issue in the courts, which could be very beneficial to you financially, because these settlements can be pretty impressive. So again, but you have to ask yourself the question: is it really wrong, or is it right? And I just don't want it there.
Yeah. Great clarification. Thank you.
Because don't file a lawsuit if it's right, because that's when I come in. That's when I come in. You don't want that. Trust me.
That's where John writes his expert witness report, and pretty much it goes away.
That's right. That's how I pay for gigantic wooden flags. And the fancy HD camera that you're working with right now too. That's right.
I give John a little bit of a hard time about his lack of studio equipment, even though it's not his line of work. Okay, I mean, a studio professional is what I meant. Okay, Randy's got a question. Is it normal for collection agencies to make a $1 payment on your closed accounts to keep them open? Wow, this brings back some memories. I haven't heard about a collection company doing this in years, probably 6-7 years.
So the way you phrase the question, and I'm going to interpret this, Randy, and if I'm misinterpreting it, then please let me know. So if I interpret your question correctly, then there is a collection with a dollar amount due, some dollar amount that's due, and the collection agency is somehow causing a periodic $1 payment to the account. And what the practical impact of that is, it has nothing to do with credit reporting. It has nothing to do with how long the item remains on the credit report, because that's still 7 years. That never changes, even if you make payments or you don't make payments. That never changes. But what it does do is it prevents it from becoming a time-barred debt, meaning that, and I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with that term, time-barred debt, but what it is it essentially, there is a clock that starts ticking on debts, and then once this clock expires, then the creditor or the debt collector can no longer sue you to collect the debt. And that a period of time before it becomes time barred varies by state. In some states, I think it's as little as 3 years, and I think in other states it's as long as 15 years, and then obviously everything in between. But if payments are being made or promises of payments are being made, then that clock keeps resetting. Not the credit reporting clock, whether or not it becomes time barred clock. And so that's a big deal, because then even if the debt would have been otherwise time barred, the fact that payments are being made on it means that the collector can still sue you to collect the debt, and they can still threaten to sue you. Because remember, the FDCPA prevents debt collectors from threatening to sue you unless they actually intend to do so. So that would be the practical impact of payments being made, whether it's $1 or any other amount.
Yeah, that definitely falls under the category of some shady practices. But like I said, I haven't heard or seen that happen in a long time. Okay, so I got another question from Miss Mason. For whatever reason, it's not coming to where I can bring it on the screen, so I'm just going to read it straight from my software. It says, I have several accounts that are marked off delinquent. The creditors are refusing to do a pay for delete. Oh, it just moved. I'm not sure if I should pay in full and have it say paid in full or settle for less. Okay, so Ms. Mason, I'm going to assume that you're talking about collection accounts, or are we talking about charge-offs? And
pay for delete generally refers to collection agencies, but I don't want to put words in Ms. Mason's mouth, but that's what I would assume if you asked me.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I can help with that if you want. So a pay for delete, just to let you know, is so collection accounts.
Yeah.
So see, I read your mind, Ms. Mason. See, so a pay for delete is an informal agreement between a debtor and a collection agency, whereby a collection agency will agree to delete an item from someone's credit report in exchange for payment. So that's why it's called pay for delete. I can tell you that pay for delete is not recognized by the credit reporting agencies as a valid process, and B, there's actually language in the standards, in the credit reporting standards manual, that's about 350 pages thick, that's sent to all the debt collectors and all the banks and all the credit card issuers and credit unions every single year. It's called the Metro 2 Manual, or the Credit Reporting Resource Guide. And there is multiple statements in that manual that indicate do not delete something just because it's paid, which basically is pay for delete. So not only do the credit bureaus not acknowledge that agreement, but they also overtly tell debt collectors, don't do it. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. No, I absolutely know that it happens and acknowledge that it happens, but I'm just telling you that it's not a process that is formalized and acknowledged as being a valid process. And so you can't go after the credit bureaus for not honoring a pay for delete deal, because they make it very clear that they don't honor them because they don't recognize them as being valid arrangements. Now, if you, Ms. Mason, made a payment to a debt collector and got a written agreement from them, some sort of a contract, and you probably know where I'm headed with this. If you have a contract with them, and that contract indicates if you pay this amount of money, we will delete the item from your credit reports, then you may have a breach of contract claim, but not against the credit bureaus, against the debt collector. So it just really depends on what type of arrangement you have with them and how formalized it is. If it's just kind of a verbal thing that you have with one of their collectors, that's not really anything other than a conversation. So that's why I always tell people, get this stuff in writing, man. Because otherwise, no one on the credit reporting side of the industry acknowledges those as being valid arrangements.
Yeah. And just this last comment, Ms. Mason, just like what John was saying, they're not supposed to do it. Yeah, I absolutely believe you've had success with it before, especially right when the pandemic took off, John. What we saw a lot were people, having conversations with people on the phone was, hey, I was talking to LVNV, Midland, and just, a lot of the big ones, and pay for delete was, I think they were just doing whatever they felt they needed to do to get paid, and even though it was against what they're supposed to be doing. Yeah,
collection agencies have no interest in dealing with the consumer once the item has been paid, right? So they're businesses. They're businesses just like Starbucks is a business, and grocery stores are businesses, and they operate off margin. That's there's a difference between revenue and there's a difference between between revenue and profit. That's called margin. It's the same thing for a collection agency. A collection agency is either buys a debt for X amount of dollars or is consigned a debt and gets X amount of whatever they're able to collect. So once they collect a debt, let's say that's their profit. That establishes their profit. Every second they spend dealing with a consumer turns this into this and then into this, and it just shrinks the profit, which means every phone call they take, every letter they read, every dispute they process, they're getting charged by somebody, whether it's AT&T for the telephone time, whether it's eOscar, they have to pay the eOscar fee every time they get a dispute from the credit bureaus, or they have a person who's being paid to deal with a paid collection rather than going after unpaid collections. And so there's a lost revenue opportunity issue. So they don't want to deal with consumers once they've collected debts because all it's doing is whittling away at their profit. They would rather delete them and be done with them. They don't care about what's on the credit report once they've been paid. That's not their business. But remember, they signed contracts with the credit bureaus, and those contracts require that they follow certain processes and procedures. And one of those is to follow the rules in the standards manual or to follow industry standards. And so that's why you have some of them will do it, some of them that won't do it. And it's not as universal or uniform across the industry because of that.
Okay, we're coming up on almost 50 minutes. John, let's do one more question with Miss Mason, and then we are going to call it a day. And I will talk to you about Wells Fargo on the next visit 2 weeks from now. Okay, so that leaves me with paying in full or settling. Is one better than the other? Are they both equally delinquent?
So, all right. So for those of you who have heard me speak, and I've been speaking publicly since 2004, so almost 17 years now. So it's not a secret what my opinions are on certain things, and I don't care what people think about my opinions. I've risen to that level where I don't care what people think about what I think. But I do have opinions about this issue, and the opinion is if you owe the money, you should pay it. However, the debt collector isn't your original creditor. Your original creditor is your original creditor. And when the debt collector takes a debt from an original creditor, they're paid a fee to collect that debt. So just because the balance on your collection might be $10,000, it doesn't mean that the debt collector has invested $10,000 into the debt. They may have only invested a couple of $100 if they bought it in bulk with other similar defaulted debts. And so in a collection scenario, that's where I absolutely suggest that you offer a settlement, some sort of amount less than what they say that you owe, in order to get it zeroed out. And to some extent, I don't disagree with doing this directly with creditors, especially if they've written off your debts and you're about to file bankruptcy, because then they get nothing. So in those scenarios, then it is better for them to get something rather than nothing. Yeah. What you want to make sure that you do, however, is get whatever settlement agreement you get from them in writing, and that once the settlement has been completed, that they update the credit reports to indicate zero. And yes, they're going to indicate paid in full. There's actually a code. It's the AU code. There's a code that they're going to put on the collection indicating that a settlement was accepted, but now the balance is zero. And here's why that's important. In the contemporary credit scoring systems like FICO 10, like what we talked about at the beginning of this call, they ignore collections that have a zero balance. So it doesn't really matter how you get there. If you get there through settlement or if you get there through paying it in full, you still got there, which means you still have a zero balance. And so in those scenarios, I like settlement as an option because A, they're still making a ton of money when you pay them, even if you don't pay them the full amount, because they don't have the full amount invested. B, it's a better deal for you because you're not paying the full amount. And three, is you're still probably helping some version, a more contemporary version of your score because you're getting that collection to show zero. And four, you end your relationship with the collection agency, which is always nice because otherwise they're calling you and writing you letters and they may sue you. And so this basically ends that relationship. So those are all good things for the debtor.
Excellent. Great answer. Okay, we're gonna call it a day. Thank you so much for joining me and John today. John, thank you so much. This was a great call. A lot of great questions from everybody.
It's the fastest. It's the fastest hour on the internet.
I'll tell you, I actively have to wave my cursor over the software to track the time because I don't want to go over an hour. And the first time I checked it, it was to 28 minutes. I'm like, whoa, we've been on for like 5 minutes, it seems like. But yeah, it goes fast, especially when you got people asking questions. Okay, thank you again so much. And next Wednesday, I'll be on most likely by myself. We can dive into anything Credit Versio related that you like. And John, thanks again, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Yes, sir. Thanks, y'all.
Okay.